Welcome to the Michigan Runner Show. Join us each time as we explore the people, the places, and the events that shape our great sport.
Hi, this is Carter Sherline for Michigan Runner and Michigan Golfer, and we're at the 2016 U.S. Amateur Golf Championship, and we've run into old friend Emily Gail from back in the day. A woman probably is responsible for me getting into running with her mega races downtown, and is now in Hawaii.
Well, it's an absolute delight, Carter, to see you. And I'm one of those people that has nothing but nice things to say about Michigan Runner, first of all, because that was the first publication back in the 70s, right? And Michigan Golfer. We put on the Emily Detroit Run. The first one was in the late 70s, the Emily Detroit Run. We started it with less than 100 runners. And I always like to tell this story when people say, it was the first run that was ever put on in the streets of Detroit. And I was up at WJR promoting that we were going to have a run in the streets of Detroit. And when I got back to Emily's across the street, the store that I had next door to the London Chop House, Chief Jim Bannon, the police chief of Detroit, had a car waiting for me. And they took me up to his office and he said, "What are you doing? We just heard you were on WJR promoting you were going to have a run in the streets of Detroit. We don't have runs in the streets of Detroit. You need to go to Belle Isle." And after a certain amount of arguing, I started crying. I get kind of teary when I think about this because it's kind of a sentimental story. I started crying. I said, "But Jim, the whole idea is we want people to see that it's safe to run in the streets of Detroit. Belle Isle, everybody goes out to Belle Isle and runs." And after a certain amount of arguing and cajoling and getting him to realize that there was a reason we wanted to run in the streets of Detroit, he said, "All right, there must be some way we can make this happen." And they gave us a parade permit because nobody had ever had a run in the streets of Detroit. And that's what they came up with of how we could be official in having it. So that run with about 100 runners, and the joke was that we had 100 policemen because it wasn't safe to run in the streets of Detroit. But fast forward many years, and we were talking earlier today about it, I think over the years, we probably had 50,000 runners because we had a lot of races over the years. We had the Emily Detroit Run that was through the city streets of Greektown and the Soup Kitchen Saloon, what is now the Riverwalk area. Of course, it wasn't quite as polished as it is now, but there was the Soup Kitchen Saloon, the Woodbridge Tavern, the Rhinoceros. We went by all these bars where they had aid stations and music, through Greektown where we had belly dancers, and we finished the race with a huge party. One of the things that we always did was we never gave awards at the finish line because the whole idea was when you cross the finish line, go grab a beer and start dancing. And the police used to say once they fell in love with the events that the worst thing that ever happened was a case of blisters. But from that first race, we created another run in the wintertime, which was called Emily and Pooh and Mixed Doubles 2, and it started in Cobo Hall and it finished in Cobo Hall. And that was another example of where people said, "It's not going to work." The people at Cobo Hall said, "No, we've never had anything like that." And we said, "Well, there's always a first time, and we seem to be pretty good at that." So that was a great event. And then probably one of my favorite was one where we started on the rooftop of Cobo Hall. Remember the spiral ramp at Cobo Hall? And we had convinced Dan Ewald, who was the PR director of the Detroit Tigers, we had convinced him that it would be really good for the Tigers. I know, Tom Monahan had just bought the Detroit Tigers. Yeah. And so we had met Tom. He wasn't really very well known then. And so they allowed us to have a run, started on the rooftop of Cobo, went down Cass Avenue, all through Mexican Town and the whole southwest part of Detroit, showcasing that area over by Tiger Stadium, and then one lap in the Tiger Stadium. And we had bought about 8,000 baseball tickets or Tiger tickets a couple months before because that was part of everybody's entry fee. And lo and behold, it was a playoff game with the Toronto Blue Jays. But we gave everybody a kazoo as part of their race packet, and we went into the park. Did you run in that race by chance?
Yeah.
Okay, do you remember the kazoos?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Still plays it once in a while.
yeah. So the seats were in the bottom of it, and we got down. It was on the lower deck, and Tom Monahan came out, and we did a whole rendition of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" with kazoos. So I talk about how the races grew, but really they grew. There were a number of people that were responsible for that, and Michigan Runner. There's no question that Art McCafferty, I get teary thinking about this, Art, because really I don't think you even realize how much you had to do with the running boom in those days. And I have a lot of the old issues that you wrote stories about the races. So I really, I've told you many, many times over the last 35 years how grateful I was, but this is another opportunity to do it. And I was always a golfer before a runner. I had always had aspirations to play on the LPGA Tour. We're out at Oakland Hills right now, and for the U.S. Amateur, I played a lot of tournaments out here as a kid with junior golf and then in women's district, and I played in many of the Michigan State, the women's golf tournament, what you all did. Just a wonderful piece showcasing 100 years of it was 100 years? Yeah, 100 years for the women's amateur. And a lot of people that I played with in those. So between Michigan Golfer and Michigan Runner, I think you all, Great Lakes Publishing, has had more than most people realize to do with keeping those two sports out in the forefront of people's minds, and also getting other people who maybe were participants deciding that they wanted to be race directors or running store owners. And so that's my little talk story right now. You got another question?
Oh boy, I don't know where else. What else is there? What is there left to ask? I mean, I certainly have a lot of memories of your races. I seem to remember getting a hold of the beer before the race one year. It might have been '79 or something, and people were still registering. So I think you said, we're going to get everybody registered who's in line, and opened up the Stroh's beer, because Stroh's was the sponsor, who's now back in Detroit, just coming back now.
Yeah.
And we were all, that was a fun ride.
Well, here's the thing. The whole thing was the idea of showcasing that it was safe to be in the streets of Detroit. And speaking of Stroh's, yeah, they have come out again. In fact, I'm going to a party tonight.
All the family money is gone.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about that.
But I saw that. I've been reading about it. And a friend of mine, Colleen Robar, is handling the coming out of Stroh's again. They're having a party tonight at the brewery out in Abbott in Corktown area tonight. So I'll be at that party, because I got a lot of stories to share, so she sent me an invitation. But Stroh's, yeah, they were great supporters of the event. Ford Motor Company, great supporters. And, that whole thing, the Ironman at the time, Herb and I had gone and done the Ironman in 1981. And there were only 20 women in the event at that time. We became very good friends with Valerie Silk, who was the owner of the Ironman. A lot of people don't realize how she became the owner. When the Ironman first started, it was just a little local event. And she and her husband owned a fitness gym called Nautilus Fitness. And they were the local sponsors of this little event called the Ironman, the first couple of events. And when Valerie and her husband got divorced, he got Nautilus Fitness Center and she got the Ironman. She knew nothing about putting on an event. So the people that were involved with her used to come to the Emily Detroit run. Art, you might remember Jeanette and Rick Gaffney, and they used to come and spend a week with us on how we did everything. So the Ironman, there's all kinds of things at the Ironman that were taken from the things we did at our race, like all the way we labeled the area that people worked in. If they worked registration, their T-shirt said registration. If they worked the finish line, it would say finish line. And if they worked the beer, it said beer. Well, the reason we ended up with all those titles on the T-shirts, because everybody wanted to be over at the beer tent before the race even started. And that's how we came up with that idea. But yeah, in 1986, when we lost the lease to the store, and kind of a tough time for Herb and I at the time, and everybody wanted our corner. Emily's across the street at the Congress Congress and Shelby next door to the London Chop House. Kind of the laughing stock when I opened, but a number of years later, we were one of the busiest stores in the city, and of course the runs and starting to say nice things about Detroit. Everyone thought it was because we were on that corner that we were doing well. And when we lost it, it was kind of a painful time, and Valerie asked me to come to Hawaii to be interim race director. And we took a lot of the ideas. We helped them create the Ironman Foundation. Now they're auctioning off Ironman slots. A lot of those things came from ideas that Herb and I had, and we would have never had all those ideas if we hadn't been putting on Emily Detroit runs for so many years, which we also would not have done if Michigan Runner hadn't been so supportive. So WJR, Michigan Runner, a lot of the TV stations, the WXYZ, WDIV, there are so many that were supportive. And what's fun for me 35, 40 years later is every time I come to Detroit, which is often, because we're really keeping the say nice things about Detroit movement out there. And every time I come, I see so many people that ran in the races. We were telling stories earlier about people that still wear the shirts and they remember them because that started it. It was a wonderful momentum, and it feels like I used to always say Detroit was a big enough town that it made a difference in the world, and a small enough city that an individual could make a difference. And it's now, with the passing of 35, 40 years, I realize what a difference we made. At the time, it was difficult. Anybody who's ever initiated putting on a run, we were pioneers. We didn't know anything about finishing times. There weren't computers in those days. We did everything by hand. It was difficult to be, I say pioneer, not just in what we created, but pioneer in all the difficult lessons that we learned. But it was a great era, and it's fun to be remembered, and it's fun to be part of the wonderful era of running and golf that's going on in the Detroit area now.